Welcome to this edition of the Fred Opie Show, where we talk about school, sports, and scholarships. This is from the perspective of somebody who has made a lot of mistakes in the past and doesn't want you to make the same mistakes. So right now we have on the line David Kelly, played his lacrosse at University of North Carolina, winning a national championship in 1986. But David also has the experience of looking at school, sports, and scholarship from the perspective of being a parent of Division I athletes, the uncle of Division I athletes. David shared an interesting story to me of being recently dropping off his son off at college. David, share that story again with us.
Last weekend, we dropped off my third son at the University of North Carolina, who was a freshman. And, they had a meet and greet with, I think it was 14 freshmen and their parents. And I guess now that I've gone through this for the third time, I remember thinking to myself, these kids have no clue. I think every one of them thinks they're going to play a lot. It's going to be nothing but roses, but most of them aren't going to play at all, and many of them might not even be there in a couple of years. Hopefully they'll be there in a couple of years, but it's a difficult road. It's difficult to get playing time. It's difficult. Every kid out there is working their butt off, and you sometimes go in with difficult expectations. And I've seen it with with the first two, and with some nephews, and fortunately, my son Patrick, who's at the University of North Carolina, is playing quite a bit. But you all think your son's going to be an All-American and all everything. It doesn't always work out that way.
David, tell the story of Patrick, because if I remember correctly, you said his senior year in high school at Capitol Hall High School in Baltimore, he was the National Player of the Year. Is that true?
Yes, he had a great year. He was a great player. In the lacrosse community, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they recruit the kids very young. So kids are making decisions as to what college they're going to go to, at least the top-tier kids. Sometimes they're freshman year in high school, and you don't know what kids are going to be there, what's in front of you. I always told my kids, we're not making a decision about lacrosse. We're making a decision about where is the best school for you. So that was our, main focus. However, he chose the University of North Carolina. When he got there, we had two super left-handed All-Americans, in Jimmy Bitter and Joey Sankey, and it was going to be difficult for Patrick to get some significant playing time on attack. He had to switch to midfield in the last 2 years. He's been playing midfield. Last year he started, I think, in 15 games as a first-string midfielder, which is great, but it's a totally different position than the position he was recruited for, and that happens a lot.
Talk about his recruiting experience. Was it early on that he made it clear that I'm going to Carolina, or what was the experience like in terms of communication with coaches, on-campus visits, etc.? What can you tell us about his experience and how that differed from the child you just dropped off?
My first son, David, he went to Rutgers, and that was my first taste of the recruiting. I would say at that time, the kids were getting recruited as sophomores. So they were making decisions as sophomores and juniors. You could sense it was ratcheting up. Patrick was asked to make a decision in ninth grade to what college he wanted to go to. He was wise. Patrick is also, I think, very gifted academically. He's actually, I'm going to brag a little bit, but he just took his MCATs and scored in the top 9% in the country. Pretty darn good, so we're proud of him there. But he's a student. He was looking at Harvard and those types of schools, some Ivy League schools as well as, and the Ivies aren't recruiting early. But Carolina really went after him, and he made his decision his freshman year, right after his freshman year, really, going into his sophomore year. My third son, Timmy, he was making a decision very early. It was even faster and much more intense. His freshman year, he was asked to make a commitment. And he had his choices were like Hopkins, Carolina, Maryland. He had a lot of great choices, as did Patrick, but one yet less year to make a decision. It was intense, and it was a good position to be in. I'm not complaining. It makes it difficult because you don't know what the future holds. When you're a 15-year-old kid, you don't even have your driver's license, and you're being asked to make a decision about your college future. It's difficult.
And what kind of pressure did you all feel as parents? Did you step back and allow the child to make the decision, or were your children, you had the kind of relationship where they were asking you your thoughts? How have you seen that change between the three boys?
So I'll tell some first of all the coaches were great. They made it really clear. They would call the high school coach or your club lacrosse coach, and then that person would say, you need to call Coach Bresci or Coach Petromile or whomever, because they're not allowed to call you. It's against NCAA reg. You would call, and they would say, hey, listen, we can't pay for you to come down here until your junior year, but we would really love it if you would take a look at our school. I can never call you. You have to call me, etc. So they follow the rules very strict. But when we went to visit those schools, the coaches were great. They took them around, showed them around, and said, this school would be a great school for you. We'd love it if you would consider committing here, early commitment. And they went through what they would give them financially, et cetera. But, my son Timmy, who was the third, I think he was really going to go to Hopkins. I think that was the school he was leaning toward. And he didn't ask us our advice. I said, before you make your commitment, I think you need to go down to the University of North Carolina. He went down there, and after he came back, he said, it's just making my decision much harder. He didn't know what to do. And he and I prayed a lot about it. We said, look, we're not going to rush this. We got time. The coaches were always saying, hey, you got time. You got to stay in touch with me because I only have 10 spots and I'm going to give them away. Timmy, you don't need to worry because you're a top recruit, so you don't need to worry. But just stay in touch with me because I don't want to give up your spot. So there was a little bit of pressure like that. But Timmy and I and my wife, we prayed a lot about what to do. Eventually, he made the decision on his own. I think he shared with us, his big reason not to go to Carolina is because his brother was there. He kind of wanted to have his own path. But his reason to go to Carolina was because he loved the school, he loved the people, he loved the coaches. And I think at the end of the day, he saw the importance of kind of getting away from home and being on his own. And he made the decision with a little bit of input from us. But I tried very hard not to be objective and to not push any one school.
What do you think is the influence that club lacrosse and these tournaments are having in the recruiting process versus the high school? And you guys play in Calvert Hall. It's a very competitive conference. What's the name of the conference that Calvert Hall's in?
It's called the MSA.
The MSA. I mean, it's been like that back in the days when I played in the 1980s and you played. How is the club affecting, if you're not an MSA kid, but you're on a club with top players, does it help balance out so you get a look? That's kind of my question.
So I actually watched the club world come into lacrosse with my oldest son. That was the first time, I think, that the club world really took over. And I had a friend tell me, who was a big soccer guy, he said, look, lacrosse is going to go the way of the soccer world. And it really has, which is the club. I'm not a big fan of club lacrosse. I know that my kids had to play it. I know that's where all the recruiting takes place. I get that. But I think it's a shame, if you want to know the truth. These parents and kids are spending thousands of dollars traveling all over the country to play against kids they could play against in their own backyard. I also think it develops a lot of bad habits. In club lacrosse, you don't have zone defense. You don't have scouting reports. So kids, they're not taking away kids' strong hands, things like that. So, the superior athletes tend to really show well in club tournaments. Mm-hmm. And the college coaches are just looking at kids that can run up and down the field real fast, run by people, shoot and score. When you play in the MSA, every week, you play Tuesday, Friday, twice a week, it's a battle, and every time you're getting scouted. So they know, take away that kid's left, he doesn't have a right hand. And you really get to develop the players and see what you have. I can tell you that in coaching some of these all-star teams, they don't have the knowledge or the skill set. The MSA gives that to these kids. So the kids from the MSA, I think, have a major advantage. I think it's true. The kids that are playing up in Long Island competitive leagues, they do. They have a major advantage because they have been taught the sport and the subtleties of the sport. So I'm not a huge club fan. I think it kind of waters down. You just get great athletes running up and down the field, and that's what a lot of these colleges are getting. The smart colleges are saying, "Hey, we're gonna be a little wiser in our recruiting." I'm already starting to see it. I think Notre Dame and schools like that have said, "Hey, I'm not going to recruit. I'm not going to do early commitments. I'm going to watch these kids in high school. I'm going to see how they develop. I'm not going to just bite at the first good athlete I see." I mean, I think it's a shame that a family has to spend, $1,500 to join a club and then drive all the way up to, if they're from Maryland, drive up to New York to play in a tournament. You're shelling out another $1,000 between gas and hotels and food, and you got to bring your family. And, the whole world revolves around little Johnny on the club team for 3 years. And the majority of those kids are not going to the top tier lacrosse schools. They're not. it's a very small minority. That's what I find a little bit discouraging. The one thing I do think that's positive is you do get to meet a lot of great people. You get to know a lot of great people, and you get to play with a lot more people than we played with when we were growing up. So that would be the positive.
When you look at the parents, and the parent whose kid goes to a Hopkins or a Carolina, and the kid is a superstar in high school, and then the kid's not playing, what can you say to a parent who is watching their child struggle through sitting on the bench for possibly 4 years? What would you say to that type of a parent?
Well, for our family has a lot of faith. So I would say God's in control, and you need to trust the Lord in this. And this is a teachable moment for your child. And, you didn't go to college so that everything was going to be rosy. You actually learn through struggles, I think. You get better through those things, and you develop character through those things. That's not what people want to hear when they're going through that. And there's lots of reasons why kids don't get playing time. Injury is probably a big one. Hey, bad timing. I got an All-American in front of me, and it's just bad timing. And then, of course, it's, hey, I'm just not as good. The next level, they get better. And at the next level, they get better than that. So it depends on why their kid's not playing. But I would tell most parents, if it's bothering them that much, then they probably have their priorities at the wrong place. My wife said this to me one day. She said, and again, this gets back to our faith. She said, hey, look, if you had a choice between your son growing and knowing the Lord in a very personal way or being the greatest lacrosse player that ever played, what would you choose? It was very convicting for me because I would hope, and I think I would, choose that he would love the Lord, know him in a personal way over being a great player. And she reminded me that's what he's developing into at the University of North Carolina. So whether he plays or not is a bonus. So that's kind of where I am. It depended on the parent and what I would say, how I would say it. Probably the best thing to do is say nothing because they probably don't want to hear anything from you anyway.
And by the way, how were your parents as fans when you played? Did you have a sense of how they were? I know some parents struggle with that.
My parents were supportive. It was so different than Fred. I mean, my dad came to games, but it wasn't every game. He didn't come to every game. We had no club, so I wasn't traveling all over where he was spending the night seeing you play 4 games during the day. My father at the time was working, and my mother were working so hard to just make ends meet. They didn't have time to do all that. Now, my dad loved coming to our games. He came to all our games. He would want to know why I wasn't playing. Hey, why do you think you're not playing? I think you're the best player in the world. You should be out there. But that would be the end of it. We'd be on to the next subject. It wasn't like it is now. At least it didn't feel like it was to me. The parents back then were not getting their significance through their kids.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
I think many of the parents today find entirely too much significance through their kids. The parents back then were not finding significance through their kids. Lacrosse was just a means to get into a good school. It wasn't what made them significant. It isn't where they found their significance. And so when I didn't play, they weren't upset that I didn't play as much as they were upset that I was upset that I wasn't playing.
Very interesting.
And I think today, and hopefully I'm that way now. I'm not upset my son's not playing. I'm more upset for my son. He's worked so hard and he's given up so much to try to be the best at something. And if he's not having the success that maybe we were hoping he's having, I'm not upset. I'm just thinking, poor guy's suffering a little bit. But that's life. No one ever said it was going to be easy. And I think I keep reminding myself, these are teachable moments. Fred, because you and I played together, I learned more from not playing than I ever learned from playing and having success. I learned more about me. I learned more about people. I learned more about life, and I think it served me very well. Although I didn't like going through it at the time, I do think it served me very well.
No, I agree 100%. I watch games, and this is the first year that I haven't coached my son, and I'm watching games, and I'm seeing parents next to me who are having a conniption because this doesn't go well. I mean, they're literally coaching the game from the sidelines. They're giving the referees what for, and it's unbelievable. I mean, sometimes there's one game I know I went to a college game, and I went to look for a spot, and I noticed there was this spot wide open, and then I sat down, and I found out quickly why it was wide open. There was a parent who was just loud as I don't know what, making everybody miserable, and none of the other parents on that team wanted to sit around that person. So parents can be a blessing to a student athlete, or they can be a serious curse to a student athlete.
Yeah. I'm a wanderer, so my wife and I go to game, and she knows I get up several times during the game and walk around the stadium or walk around the facility. And for me, I usually pray, but that's what I do. I don't like being with other parents because sometimes I usually talk quietly to myself, but I'm afraid I might say something stupid that I would regret. Like, gosh, that kid should have passed that ball. So I try to avoid being around too much. But I'll tell you another thing too is. My father was always like, I've come to every one of your games, and I tried to do that for my kids, and it got to a point where I said to myself, you know what, I don't want my kids playing for me. I want them playing. What I'd love them to do is to be playing for an audience of one, but I want them to play because they want to play. So I would intentionally miss games, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Intentionally miss games because I wanted them to know that they aren't playing for me. And it wasn't easy sometimes, but I would say, I'm not going to your game today. You should want to play well whether I'm there or not. You should want to play whether I'm there or not, because that's how it used to be, And I think that served me well as well. I think that made them realize it wasn't all about them.
And how are you in the car after the game when you're going home with the kid or walking back to the locker room? Are you able to turn off the lacrosse and just be the dad, or how are you that way?
I've had good moments and bad moments.
Thank you for your honesty.
I think I really struggle when I don't think they've given 100% effort, or if I felt they were being hot doggy or showmanship. Yeah. I struggle with that. Confronted them on that. I think it's always helpful for me to spend an hour after a game away from them, just so I can put it in perspective and recognize my role is to be an encourager. It's not to be the coach. If they ask, I'll be thrilled to share what I saw, but my job's to encourage. And that's a learned process for me. I'm learning to let the coaches coach and let me just encourage and be there for them. It's easy to be there for them when you win, and you win an overtime game. It's when they lose and they had an opportunity to have the game winner and they didn't stick it. That's when I want to be there and say, dude, you took a great shot. There's nothing you should be worried about.
I'm really glad that you're able to share viewing the game as a parent, because I do think the generation that we have now who is parenting has a problem letting go. It makes it difficult for the child. It also makes it difficult for the coaching staff to do their job.
I can empathize with the parent who does that. I really do believe our job's to encourage and not to coach.
That's a wrap for this show. Thanks for listening. To hear more content like it, go to fredopie.com. Send us your questions on Facebook at www.facebook.com/The Fred Opie Show and via Twitter at Fred Opie Show. This show could have been brought to you by your company. If you have questions about advertising and sponsoring this show, contact us at fdopie@gmail.com. That's fdopie@gmail.com. Special thanks to Babson College for its support of the show.